Welcome in to the Rock Talk Studio, the podcast that answers the question, is this rock and roll book or documentary worth your time and money? Today I'm going to be taking a look at the documentary Carlos about Carlos Santana, which I will review, rate, and determine if this doc is for you. And then, as always, I'll leave you with all the book buzz and documentary news you don't want to miss out on. I'm your host, Big Rick. Join me for an exclusive look into what's hitting the shelves and the screens, and get ready to rock your reading and viewing list. Carlos Santana is a unique personality. There's no doubt about it. And in the world of rock and roll, having a unique personality is pretty much a requirement, but no one speaks or articulates like Santana. He's got this metaphysical, dreamy, spiritual, positivity vibe thing that he transmits, and it just sets him apart from other rockers. And in this documentary, you get a heavy dose of that throughout. It's narrated by Santana, some of it in the form of answering questions like interview questions. And that philosophical speak, it dominates the overall tone of this documentary. Great beginning. One of the best beginnings. I love the beginning. And without giving it away, I'll just say it's ruled by the heavy rhythm that Santana's music is built on. I love the way the percussions form the backbeat to not only the beginning of the story, but the whole documentary. Carlos, the documentary, is told like most traditional linear tales. It's starting when he was young and showcasing his rural upbringing, dominated by his family moving to Tijuana, Mexico. His father was a musician. He played guitar. He played violin. And he plays a big part in this story. Santana followed in his footsteps, eventually playing and joining his mariachi band. And then a move to San Francisco changed all that when Santana felt and saw what the power of electric guitar can do. And that was in the Fillmore West Club, Billy Graham's club. There's a really cool clip of the first known recording of Santana when he was 19. And if you just heard that and didn't know anything about him, you would be sold. Other than Santana pontificating on Santana, you also get a few moments of his sisters and his wife. And the setup for this was a little sterile. Everyone is sitting at a long table. The sisters are on one side and Santana and his wife are on the other. And maybe if it was just shot differently, I couldn't help but think like if it was just the sisters alone without Santana sitting there, it just kind of felt safe with Carlos there. And the doc does this throughout. To me, it seemed a little controlled at times. Though it touches on a few deep subjects, the documentary doesn't go very deep. And with the lack of anyone else telling the story other than the sisters and the wife interjecting a little bit, they don't trot out a bunch of rock and rollers or anything like that. It lacks a little bit. I miss that, an outside perspective. I think it could have really helped deepen the influence that Santana has brought to music if they had a few people talking about their experiences with him and how their music affected them. But that's really not what this is about. It's a celebration of a great body of music, really. It's presented with a bunch of great concert footage. The Woodstock piece, of course, is in there, and a few other moments, live shots that are really great, and they really shine through. Some of my favorite parts were not the concert stuff, though the concert stuff was good, but there are these old homemade clips that Santana made of just himself, kind of dark and blurry at times, and he's just playing his guitar, shirt off, very casual, sitting in a chair or hanging out on his couch, just expressing himself through the guitar. There's just not enough of that, though. Not enough intimacy to really pull you in. And I don't think the director was really going for that at all. It's more of a broad look. And it's a little over an hour, too. So it's a little short. It went by really fast. And the way it's put together, it's shot really, really well. Like, I've got to give the producer, Rudy Valdez, a lot of credit. It's very clean. The cuts are great. And the way the music is interjected really gave the doc a great, for the lack of a better word, rhythm. Carlos, the documentary, runs 87 minutes and is directed by Rudy Valdez. Okay, now it's time to stamp the official Rock Talk Studio rating on the Carlos documentary. Let's see where this book stacks up against all the other titles I reviewed. That's coming up next. All right, let's put a rating on this documentary and kind of see where it falls and kind of see if it's for you or not. Here's how my rating system is set up. It's 1 through 4. A 1 is a front row center. It doesn't get any better. A very unique piece, an outstanding piece, something that really sets itself apart. It's very rare that I've given out the front row centers. 2 is a floor seat, highly recommended, really good piece. I definitely suggest that you go out and check it out. A 3 is a loge seat. That's okay. It could be recommended. It's okay. It's nothing that's blowing me away, but it still could be recommended. And 4, you're in the nosebleeds, baby. Carlos Santana, or the documentary called Carlos, is a 3. It's a loge seat. It has its moments, especially the music parts. I want to stress that, but it's not something that I would highly recommend. It doesn't make me say, don't miss it, but I would recommend it. I think there is something there to it. It was entertaining. I would recommend seeing it, especially if you're a Santana fan. If you're a Santana fan, I don't see any reason why you're not going to really like this. And the reason why I would recommend it also to everybody, a casual fan, I think, is because it's a really just a wide lens look at 50 years of great music and the interesting story about the career of Carlos Santana. Are you looking for more good rock and roll books and rock and roll documentaries? Well, check out the archives of the show. There's some really good stuff in there lately. There's a great book that just came out, Drums and Demons, about Jim Gordon by Joel Selvin. One of the most tragic stories in the history of rock and roll. Really well-written book. I highly recommend that one. The new Geddy Lee memoirs in there. I did a show on that. That's a great book. And one of my favorite books from last year. Check that show out. It's called Deliver Me from Nowhere, The Making of Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska. The book is by Warren Zanes. There's also documentary stuff. I did The Immediate Family about this LA studio session players, the kings of the studio. And then there's the Mr. Jimmy documentary. That's a must-see about Akira Sakurai, who has dedicated his life to recreating Led Zeppelin concerts note for note. Check out the archives of the show for more rock and roll books and documentary recommendations. All right, you know what time it is. It's time for all that book buzz and documentary news. This is the part of the show where I've gathered all this information about what is coming out, what's new, what to get psyched about, what I'm really pumped up about, so you don't have to search around and look about what's coming out and spend a bunch of time. I've already done that for you. I got you covered. Let's start with a book called The Deadhead Cyclist. And this is the most unique book I've ever read on the Grateful Dead, by far. It's written by Stu Salo, who is the founder of the Boulder Weekly in Colorado, which is an alternative newspaper that's been around for 30 years. He's been a Deadhead since 74 and an avid cyclist, hence the name of the book. And what he's done with this is he takes Dead shows and uses them as the foundation for discussions on the many deep life lessons in the Dead's lyrics and the many deep life lessons that he's learned along the way. He talks a lot about aging. He's in his 60s now, and that was kind of the one of the things that was motivating him to do this. There's 52 chapters, so 52 shows are talked about, and a bunch of bike rides while pontificating, exploring, dissecting the deeper meaning of not only the Dead's lyrics, but their vibe, their culture, and the way they used the live show to express themselves. Some of these chapters go really deep. A few times I chose to put the book down to contemplate what he was talking about. Some of the philosophy proposed took me a while to kind of digest. You have chapters on killing the ego, addiction, commitments, all kinds of stuff. It's not a book that you can just burn through if you really want to find value in the message and the teaching and the perspective that Salo conjures up with these pages. I think Deadheads are really going to love this book. It gets real intimate with the songs, so it's not just about his philosophies, but the songs and the way he talks about the music and his devotion and his love for the Dead are extremely expressed in this book. And the beauty here is, even though you might not know the Dead well, the themes he explores are universal and are life questions posed by anyone. Very, very unique book. but a really good book, The Deadhead Cyclist by Stu Sallow. Check it out. I get sent a bunch of books. I got sent a couple of books, and after looking into it, I found out that it was from a very prolific writer named Stacy Lane Wilson, whose series of books is called Rock and Roll Nightmares. Stacy also put together a really cool doc on the Ventures. Her dad was in that band, and she won some awards for this documentary. That's a cool documentary. Check it out. But her books are a blend of fictional mysteries, kind of spooky tales. She does true crime stories. And what is cool is they're all based in the world of rock and roll. It's a very different kind of approach to rock and roll. I read volume 1, which is called Rock and Roll Nightmares, True Stories. And this one focuses on the famous, ill-fated Rock and Roll 27 Club. Plus, you get just all kinds of things in that theme. Suicides, by guns, by pills, by booze. There's shocking deaths, tragedies, strange, unexplained incidents. This book was a really great overview of all the fallen members of rock and roll. She doesn't get too deep, but she gets deep enough to keep you interested. 300 pages worth of rock and roll nightmares. And the second book is called Along Came Scary. This one falls more into the macabre genre. There's a lot of Hollywood history. There's dark themes. There's spooky stuff. With this book, Wilson teams with other writers, and she tells 10 stories based in the 1960s. So this one's a little bit different, and I think I would say most of her rock and roll nightmare books fall into this kind of category. She brings plenty of details to the chapters and writes in a fairly easy style. This is something different and an alternative to the straight-ahead rock and roll books. I like the imagination and the unique subject matter and how it is all wrapped in and around the many sides of rock and roll. Makes me want to go to the Rainbow in Hollywood on Sunset, slink into a booth, order a few drinks, and crack open these books. Check it out, Rock and Roll Nightmares. Those books are out now, a couple under the radar titles that I suggest you take a look at. Latest announcement time, a few things that we have to look forward to. I'm going to start with Chris Stein's book. Chris Stein's book, Under the Radar. Stein is the co-founder, songwriter, and guitarist for the iconic band Blondie. He was Debbie Harry's performing partner, her lover, a lifelong friend, and his new book looked back on the 80s when Blondie was pumping out a ton of great music. The book comes out on June 11th. I got an early copy, and I'm about 50 pages from the end, and you know me, I'm not going to spoil anything, but I will say this, it definitely stands a good chance of getting its own show. This book definitely it deserves a full review, a full rating. Great 80s stories, New York City, Blondie stuff. That's a new book from Chris Stein called Under the Rock. Another new book, a really cool book that was just announced is coming out, and it got my attention. I wanted to let everybody know about it. It's a book from John Lennon and Yoko Ono called Mind Games, the definitive exploration of the writing, recording, and release of Lennon's celebrated fourth solo album, Mind Games. I like books like this that really get into the making of a iconic record or a pivotal time in an artist's life. Remember, this was an album that was made during the time that the government was after Lennon. They were trying to deport him. I've got high hopes for this one, and I'll talk more about it as we get closer. It's still a ways away. This one's coming out September 24th. John Lennon and Yoko Ono, Mind Games. Going to wrap up the show with a documentary that was just announced and is just coming out called Catching Fire, the story of Anita Pallenberg. Pallenberg was a muse of the Rolling Stones. This doc is a story of, a fierce rock and roller. She was an actress. She was a muse. She was a mother. She just rose to prominence in the 60s and the 70s. And the documentary uses the words of her unpublished memoir to kind of tell the story. Never seen before home movies, family photographs, just documenting her life and, the time she spent with a Rolling Stone. The documentary is narrated by Scarlett Johansson, and it comes out the week of May 5th. I just saw it the other night. It came out a little too close to the publication of this podcast, so I'm going to save it, and you'll get my thoughts on that in one of the next coming episodes. I will say this, just like the Chris Stein book, This definitely deserves its own episode with a spotlight title, full review, full rating. So look forward to that coming up in the next few podcasts. Thanks for tuning in. Love talking rock and roll and getting a chance to recommend a few titles for you. Just because the episode is over doesn't mean the conversation is. Join me over on Instagram or Threads or YouTube for more book and doc talk. All right, tear it down, pack it up, and head on down the road. We'll see you next time in the Rock Talk studio.